Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman. You're about to make the jump from the dishonest mainstream media into free and independent thought from key thought leaders on the subjects of culture, causes, politics, and faith. Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman. My guest today is Marcel Becker. Marcel Becker is a man with a story. His biography, Free at Last, comes out this week and was written with my friend, W.A. Fulkerson. Marcel is now a very successful businessman that's worked his way up from the very bottom. And when I say bottom, I mean the bottom. His father was an abusive former Nazi soldier. He's an expert, if not well-trained martial artist, been in a biker gang, been in and out of prison, and much more. But most importantly, his story is rooted in redemption. And that's why I'm really, really excited to talk with you today, because I think right now, especially in America, we need to hear stories of redemption. So Marcel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Reed, it's my privilege to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you for being on, taking the time. Like I said just a moment ago, I know you're super busy. So before we jump into any of your backstory, I want to, and usually I do this, I jump into kind of a current event or something like that, but I really would like to hear your perspective as somebody who has been very successful in turning businesses around who are in crisis or kind of in failure mode. You kind of take the Titanic and you turn that ship around. That's a really, really difficult thing to do. And you made a little bit of a habit of that most recently. And I think Wesley told me just the other day that you're about to jump into something, a scenario like that again, perhaps. But needless to say, when you're in that position, you have to think and be sensitive of a lot of things and a lot of dynamics that even some businessmen don't have to think about. You have to be really incredibly careful, really incredibly mindful, and really dynamic and really bold to be able to turn a business around that's in crisis. So I thought that it would be really interesting to hear you kind of weigh in a little bit on what's happening in Georgia. Of course, you're in California. I'm just on the border of Georgia, so we're really close to Atlanta, which is, of course, a major city of Georgia, the capital city. So needless to say, there's a lot of hubbub going on right now with the Georgia voter law. I've actually gone through that 98-page bill myself to actually look for any remnants of racism. Can't find a single thing. But there's a lot of talk about it. But needless to say, one of the most troubling things, regardless of what your position is on the Georgia voter bill itself, one of the most troubling things is what has happened with businesses weighing in on this Georgia voter law. So it really presents a troubling situation in that when businesses start using their power and their money to start kind of weighing in exponentially on politics and even swaying politics in their favor, it's troubling enough when they do something that's relevant to them, but when they start doing things that are not relevant to what they actually do as a business, and maybe start talking about what kids should be taught in school, or maybe start talking about gender issues surrounding bathroom and sports, or even what a state and local municipality should be doing in terms of an election, it starts to get troubling that these businesses could quickly start abusing their power to start weighing in on individual citizens. So I'm just wondering what your perspective is on the role of business, not necessarily from a political standpoint, but from staying out of politics, or whether they should be involved in politics. What's kind of your thoughts on what just took place in Georgia and some of those businesses that have contemplated even signing a letter that they're going to boycott Georgia if they don't do what they want?
Yeah, Reed, I am vehemently opposed to businesses weighing in politically on issues of any kind. I'm in a business and we're a defense contractor, so we're very concerned about the federal budget and how that's going to play out. And we're concerned about legislators that are pro-defense and anti-defense and things like that. And so I think a business's role is to provide information through the very narrow lens of how it affects their business. And using my business as an example, we would inform our population of this is the folks that are being elected, and we believe if elected, these individuals would support the defense industry. And we keep it very narrow, very thin, very on point, and it's not really taking a side, yes or no. We're just providing information, and it's exclusive to looking through the lens of our business. When you start weighing in on issues that you shouldn't be weighing in on, that have no relevance to your business or your population, that's a very slippery slope. And me, for one, I don't like it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's slippery and it's dangerous, right? Just because you can find yourself all of a sudden. And by the way, I think the media was kind of setting this up to be something that they were inviting businesses to jump into. But many of these companies have decided that, hey, we are going to stay in our lane, to their credit, which I think they should, because it makes sense, and citizens may not even like it when Coke, goes to bat for sugar and sugar lobbyists and that kind of stuff. And it may not be a good look, like I said, and even citizens may not like it, but at least that's relevant to their business. And they got to be really, really careful that they're not weighing in exponentially on things that that don't matter to them, that are not relevant to what they do as a business, but do matter to the average everyday citizen. So I think that's super important. So yeah, I appreciate your perspective there in saying, hey, this is not a matter of like not having a backbone when we need to, or not necessarily saying yes or no. Providing information, being there as a support system for citizens, because actually, isn't that what business is about? It's about serving people. I think sometimes businesses lose that, right? They miss the fact that they're there to support their employees, and they're there to support the people that are coming to partake in their product, and they make it about their personal stances, or maybe their personal desires, maybe even their personal desire to increase wealth. And maybe I would ask you about that. What's your personal philosophy of business? Because there could be businessmen that are listening to this right now and maybe could glean a little bit from the way that you personally approach business. What's the purpose of business, just generally speaking? And I know that varies from business to business, but perhaps there's maybe just kind of like a mainline foundational principle of business that all businesses should operate under.
Well, again, I think that the businesses need to stay in their lane. It needs to be an issue that is of significance to their business, and then they need to play an informative role, not a dictatorial one. This is what you need to do. This is the issue. Here's both sides of the issues. Always present both sides.
Sure.
And convey how it affects your business. And if it doesn't affect your business, most businesses are members of chambers of commerce or industry associations. And that is how you can do your advocacy at arm's length, right? By being a member of an industry association or a chambers of commerce. If the business community feels strongly about an issue, that is where you would push that issue, and so that way you keep the issue at arm's length, and an individual business is not subscribing or promoting a social issue for that matter. And even chambers of commerce, they stay in their swim lanes as well. If you can't make a direct tie to business or the business community, nobody should be weighing in on it. I think it's an egregious overreach. I'm not happy with what I'm seeing there, and I would counsel anybody that's in business, if you're not playing an informative role and you're presenting both sides from a position of neutrality, you're in the weeds.
Yeah,
for sure. That's great. So I want to jump into a little bit of your backstory. I don't want to give too much away that's in the book, but I do want to kind of whet people's appetite. Now, the first thing that I saw in the book is in chapter 1. You go a little bit into your background and who your parents were, and you write very very lovingly, I think, about both of them. But you're also very, very honest. That's the one thing I would take away from the book, is that you're very, very honest. And like I said, I think we need redemption stories right now. But in order to tell the full redemption story, sometimes we have to go to the dark places of our life and tell what God has done to redeem us and where we've come from, so that you can appreciate where we've come from and the journey and all of that stuff. And so you do that. And so your dad was a Nazi soldier. So I'm just wondering, because you don't talk to somebody every single day whose dad was a Nazi soldier. First of all, especially in this present climate, I'm sure that was a little difficult for you to share. But second of all, that must have been difficult for you growing up. So I'm just wondering if you can kind of share what your dad did, how he got enrolled in the Nazi regime, and then how that played a part in your upbringing as a young man.
Sure. As a point of clarification, my dad was in the German army, the Wehrmacht, and he was conscribed. He was drafted, just like a lot of American youth were drafted into Vietnam. My dad was drafted into the German army. Now, the Nazis, that was the political party that was ruling Germany at the time. And being a German soldier doesn't necessarily equate to being supportive of the Nazi regime, which my father was not. I mean, he was vehemently opposed, but like when you have a draft, just like when we had the draft during Vietnam, he wasn't asked what his political affiliation was. He was told, this is what you're going to go do. And you know, my dad spent a lot of time on the Russian front, which history tells us was you know, where the World War II was won and lost, is on the Russian front. And it wasn't pretty. And like many of our soldiers today, God love them, come home with post-traumatic stress disorder. My dad had that before it was ever recognized in the clinical sense. I think they called it shell shock back in that day. Right. And it just really overshadowed his entire life. And you know, I got some of the trickle down from that. You know, it was a very, my childhood, you know, was very violent and brutal and difficult, right? You know, I think that we define poor. Both my parents were immigrants, and it was just a really difficult time. But like I said, my father, you know, unfortunately, he was the one that was dealt the worst hand by having to, you know, go to war, supporting a party he didn't really believe in, you know, spending a miserable time on the Russian front, and you know, receiving several injuries and you know, some mental health damage that I don't think he ever recovered from.
Yeah. And so, correct me if I'm wrong about this. Wasn't he captured by the Russians?
He was.
Yeah. So did he spend time as a POW?
Yes, and as a POW, he is, as I know it, he escaped from the Russian prison camp that he was in, and then he made his way back to the front lines, and then the Germans captured him. And then the Germans felt he was a deserter. They didn't believe his story. And so they treated him in many ways worse than his Russian captors did, because they thought that he had deserted. And it took them several times to check his records and find out, you know, that there may have been some truth in what he was saying. And as I know it, that there were several occasions where they took him in front of a firing squad and dry fired on him to try and get him to tell what they thought was the truth, which he wouldn't tell them because it wasn't the truth. And then as I understand it, he was also after that incident, he was put in what they call a punishment squad, and that's the squad that they kind of they put out there as the sacrificial lamb, so to speak. So, you know, they don't have any expectation for those folks to return from their assignment. You know, let's put it that way. So he survived that, and he finally was able to see the turn in the tide, and he went to a place in Europe where he was able to surrender to the Americans, and then he became an American. He was interned in an American prisoner of war camp for a couple of years before they let him go.
Yeah, and all that at the age of, I think, like around 19. So you can imagine that was a really difficult adolescence, young manhood anyway for him. And so he brings a little bit of that into the home, and you kind of tell that story. Needless to say, he's a very strict man. He puts you in martial arts at a young age with a very kind of strict teacher, and that equips you to not only defend yourself because of what you experience at home, but also because now you have the tools, learning martial arts. And I don't know if you'd consider yourself an expert, but at least in the story, you talk about being able to handle yourself pretty well. So that naturally leads you to a place where you use these tools, and like most people who have them and who don't have really that kind of basis or moral foundation, you have just an abusive background. You use that doing some collecting and that kind of stuff, and using what you had learned to try to make sure that you got money from people who it was owed to.
Right. Well, the getting into the martial arts, was my own doing. My dad didn't have anything to do with it, other than being the driving force behind it. Because one of the things that I was determined to do from a very young age is never be afraid of another living, breathing human being, as I was afraid of my father.
Yeah.
So that is what put me on that pursuit to being in the martial arts, and I did it for many years, and several different styles, and became quite accomplished, and actually was doing things like the UFC does today, the cage fighting and stuff, long before it became fashionable, when it was still underground. And that's how I kind of was discovered by the underworld. There was always a lot of gambling going on and things of that nature. And one time, I was approached by someone that and said, "Hey, you know what? Can you want to make some money?" And it's like, "Yeah, really? Are you kidding?" "Sure." And so it was like, "Well, this is what this guy owes us, and if you go over and talk to him and help us get that back, we'll give you a percentage." And so it began, and then we just continued to grow that, and then I realized that I didn't need to do it in their shadow. I could do it on my own, and eventually I wound up buying debts for pennies on the dollar. And when someone's in the business of buying and selling, narcotics or whatever, if, there's no better business bureau, there's no consumer affairs. So if someone rips somebody off, you have to address that. You can't just let it go, because if you let it go, you're out of business, right? So not everybody's willing to do what it takes to address an issue like that. Some of it's messy. And so, they hire people like me who have no aversion to doing what it takes. And we were all highly successful, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, you were good at your job, and it landed you in federal penitentiary a couple times. How many times did you do stints in prison or jail?
Five total. Five total. So I did time in California several times, and then I did time in Oklahoma, federal custody, and then one time in Texas, which was also federal custody. And the federal government, they if you're from a certain area, they make sure that they move you to a place that's away from your network to serve your time, especially if you're what they call tipped up, like I was, involved with organized crime and involved with a gang and stuff. They want to get you away from your network, away from your resources. So if you're from San Diego, California, and winding up in the middle of Oklahoma is about the best they can do,
Yeah.
to get you away from everything. But yeah, 5 terms total.
And can you say what those terms were for? Just those various terms.
Well, I think that, that there was all of them had to do with violence or the drug trade. Either manufacturing narcotics or the collections, or things that at one time was a kidnapping associated with collecting a debt. Assault and battery, commission of great bodily harm, and things of that nature, all in, like I say, all in relationship to the trade.
Yeah. And I want to kind of paint this picture because I think people will, like I said, get a really deeper appreciation for your story when they see kind of where you came from. And I'll paint it this way too before I ask the next question. Like I was speaking with Darryl Strawberry not too long ago in one of the podcasts, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, baseball player, had a really successful career. In fact, I think in like 1991, he was the second highest paid MLB player in Major League Baseball. And so he experienced kind of like the heights of heights in his day, but then also experienced the low of lows. And I told him this on the podcast. I think that happened so that you experience the height of heights and the depths of depths, so that you could speak to everybody in between. And I think that's kind of similar to your story too. So I don't want to dwell on it, but I want to just create this understanding of like the kind of guy you were. You were one bad dude. So you were also a 1%er. Now, can you explain to us what that is? Because I went and looked it up as well when I read that, because I'd never heard that term before. So what's a 1%er?
So this was an accidental term that was that was spawned by, I think, the American Motorcycle Association, and they were promoting motorcycle enthusiasts, and people were making this parallel with outlaw biker gangs, and I think the American Motorcycle Association said that that is not representative of most motorcycle enthusiasts. That is merely the 1% of motorcycle guys. And that's the way I remember it anyway. And so the outlaw biker community actually embraced that and said, yeah, you're right, we are the 1%. And it became a handle for all the outlaw bikers to label themselves as 1%ers, to signify that they were not part of the regular motorcycle culture. They were part of the 1%.
Yeah, so you go from all of that, and then in the book, you said something to the effect of, like, it was kind of cliche that you go from that kind of life of crime, even being a collector, to going to work on the dock, because you go through a series of jobs after you finally do your last prison stint, and you find out that you've got two kids that you didn't even know about, and they're kind of dropped off on your doorstep. And so you're starting to realize you got to turn your life around. And so some of the line of work, just because of the way you can handle yourself, kind of comes first. And then you find yourself just trying to stay away from that kind of old life and anything that resembles it. So yeah, I think you were even a bouncer at a strip club at one point in time. And then so you go to work at the docks. So I'm assuming that maybe, I think it was on the Waterfront. Maybe that's what you're referring to, that Marlon Brando movie where he goes from being a collector to working on the docks. But you go there and you start what might be considered at the bottom, and then you work your way up. So could you just kind of help us understand and help the listeners understand kind of what that progression looked like to where you are now presently in business?
Wow, that's sure. When I was released from custody the last time, I had realized during my last sentence, that after being stabbed several times, and I just enough was enough. But what really cinched it was when my ex-wife brought those two children to me within, I think, 60 days of getting out, and just dropped them off on my doorstep and said, hey, look, I've had them the last 5 years. Now it's your turn. And, I never saw her again until my son's funeral several years later, 30 years later, or whatever. But when all that happened, I realized that, with both my parents as immigrants, my family all overseas, my father's deceased, my mother has moved back to Europe. There was no one other than myself that these kids could rely on, because their mother was still deep into drugs. And when she dropped them off on my doorstep, she was deep in her addiction, still, battling that. And I think she battles that to this day, to be honest with you. Sure. I think she might have traded vices, but anyway. So here I am with, two young kids, and needing to support for them, and not really having any significant skills. I mean, the skills that I had were in the construction industry and welding and stuff like that. And that industry, at the time I was released, had tanked. The economy had tanked, and there was no building going on, and I just couldn't. And so someone kept asking me, hey, why don't you come down to the waterfront? Why don't you come down to the shipyards? I can get you a job. And I'm thinking, oh man, I don't know. I didn't know anything about the shipyards. But eventually, after trying several places, the shipyards was the only place that would hire me with my record. Now, today, it'd be a little bit different, because in a post-September 11th environment, there's a lot of security changes that were made, and they're not quite as welcoming to ex-offenders that are fresh out like I was at the time. Things have changed. You got to get some distance between the time you got out and when you go apply. But back then, it was a place where ex-offenders could go. They didn't care where you came from or what you did, as long as you had vital signs and you showed up every day. They were happy to have you. So.
Yeah. And can we pause that in that part of the story real quick and just ask this question? Because I think that's an interesting thing that we don't often wrap our mind around. probably the thing that I've seen the best that does it is Shawshank Redemption, in taking a look at what happens when prisoners get out of prison and getting their life back in order. Because we don't talk about this enough, but the reality is that that's a difficult process. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit. But just generally speaking, did you have issues finding jobs that weren't within the line of work that got you in trouble in the first place when you got out?
I had several issues finding work when I got out. I mean, first, at, at that time, you still had to disclose you were a felon on any potential employment application. Since then, we've passed some laws where in California, they banned the box where you can even no longer ask that. You can only ask that question after you've interviewed a candidate and offer them employment. Only then can you ask them if they have any history. So we've come a long way, but at that time, you still had to check the box that you're a felon. And usually that was 99.9% of the time meant that you didn't get past first base. That's the way it was. And they always asked, what for? And after a while, I just wrote which time, so tired of it, but
Yeah.
I we'll discuss an interview as well, but and so when I found out that the Waterfront was a place that didn't matter, because the Waterfront does not attract the creme de la creme of society. It's a dangerous place. It's a heavy industry. It's a lot safer today than it was 30 plus years ago, but it wasn't an attractive place for a lot. So they had a need for people, and again, they were hiring anybody that had vital signs that needed a job. And so with that challenge, though, on the Waterfront, there's a lot of opportunity, because if you got a little bit of snap in your action, you can advance pretty quickly, which is what I had the good fortune of being able to do. I started at the rock bottom, most entry level position that you can have, and at that time, minimum wage was $5.50 an hour, and that's what I made. And as you mentioned, that wasn't enough to support the family, so I had to bounce strip clubs on 3 nights a week, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and actually made more than I did in the shipyards on those 3 nights. But the strip club was not the path to legitimacy, and I was determined to become legitimate. So I put all my efforts into the shipyards and only worked the strip clubs and the occasional bodyguard thing for as long as I had to, until I was able to advance far enough in the shipyards to be able to earn an income to where I didn't have to do all that extracurricular activity, that side hustle, so to speak.
All right, I got to ask a kind of side question. So, did you ever think about going into professional fighting?
No, I was good, but I wasn't that good.
Okay, you can handle yourself on the
Okay,
street.
you can handle yourself on the street.
Yeah, I'm not so good when there's rules,
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so needless to say, I don't want to see you in a dark alley ever. But so from there, you kind of work your way up, and then you start working with the Navy actually, and you get yourself around some successful businessmen, and you prove yourself in those industries, and you start experiencing a little bit of success. So if you would, right before we kind of the tipping point, which is odd, right? You would think most people say the tipping point was somewhere down here, but your tipping point's at a different place. So before we get to that tipping point, I'll tease that, just say, so talk about kind of that period of time where you start to have really financial success, and what that looks like. What was the thing that kind of brought you to a place of business success, and then how did your business career start to kind of just catapult?
So, at the company I was working at the time, it was privately held, and the ownership believed from training and promoting from within. And so if you were dedicated and you showed a little bit of potential, they would actually invest in you and develop you professionally. And so I was one of the fortunate ones to receive a lot of training, and I had one of the most rapid ascensions into management. But after a period of time, and I became very accomplished, those guys, they sold the company to a private equity firm, Wall Street, for lack of a better definition. And these guys are in the business of buying and selling companies that work on defense contracts. And when they were acquired, I kind of hit a glass ceiling. I was no longer fit the profile for further advancement in that, that corporation. I hit it. I was at a level, and the folks that they were hiring for the next level used to be promote from within, but with the new ownership, it was these guys were retired Navy captains. They were academy grads, or they had a formal education that I could not compete with. And so I was passed over for promotion a couple of times, and I realized that I did not fit the corporate profile any longer. And so I had to ask myself, after a very short time, a little bit less than 10 years on the waterfront, I hit the proverbial glass ceiling. And, just doing the math on it, it was like, man, if you're lucky, you can work another 20 years and retire. If you're unlucky, it's going to be 30. Are you prepared to do the next 3 decades in this current capacity and rate with no hope for advancement? Well, that was a very easy no. And so what as some say it's a stroke of brilliance, I say it's a stroke of good fortune. Good Lord was smiling on me before I even knew it. But I was working with another contracting company, a subcontractor, that Reed, man, they couldn't manage their way out of a public restroom with 2 hands in a treasure map. But man, they had a lot of workers, and I needed those workers. So I was managing their contracts for them, and I hired them exclusively for their workforce, and was happy to manage them just so I could get those additional people, because we were in a resource-challenged environment. And so when I hit that glass ceiling, I went to one of the principals in that company, and I told him, I said, look, I've been managing your projects for the last couple of years. You've been making good money, right? And he says, yeah, right. And I said, well, hey, how about I come on your team, and I will continue to help you manage and grow your enterprise. And that company was a small company. It had maybe 45 people. They made maybe between $500,000 and $750,000 a year. And the guy said, yeah, sure. Why don't you do that? And I said, okay, but if I come over and help you, I don't want just a salary. I want a position. And if I hit certain performance expectations and milestones, then I would like a position in the company, because I didn't want to be in the situation I just left, where I do a great job and then all of a sudden I go so far and I'm done. So I wanted a stake in the company, and I was willing to accept, a salary that was a little less than what I was accustomed to get that position.
And where did you get that confidence from that you could do those things?
Well, I can tell you that one of the things about spending, nearly a decade in maximum security penitentiaries, right? You have a point of reference of how lousy things can get, or how dangerous things can get. And so, what may have seemed like a courageous move to many, to me, it was like, this is a no-brainer. Why not, right? Because I know how lousy things can get, and this isn't it, And so I wasn't intimidated by the risk, and that's where the confidence come from, because I knew how life can get real ugly, and I didn't think that in this transaction there was anything that intimidated me to the point to where I would be scared of doing it, so to speak. So maybe it was foolish confidence, but confidence nonetheless. So when I told them that, they said, okay, but you've got 90 days to make us operationally sound, because we're going bankrupt, which was a shocker for me. But at the same token, it was leverage that I used to get my position in the company, because I didn't have no problem making them operationally sound. I've been managing them de facto for the last couple of years anyway. I knew where their problems were, and I was able to fix those very, very quickly. And I did fix that very quickly, and they didn't go bankrupt. And then over the next several years, we continued to grow the company. And at the time, I continued to grow my position in the company, bought a couple partners out, continued to build it up. And when we sold that company, we had 500 employees in several states. So it was quite a growth. And then that was a pretty good move for me. And then when the new owners took over, again, a private equity firm. But this time I had the upper hand, not them. And they asked me to stay on for 2 years for a transition phase. And they kind of moved me out of an operational role into a government affairs role, because again, we're working with the federal government, defense industry, defense budget. I was a pretty astute student of that, and so they wanted me to play more of a government affairs role for the enterprise, and I was happy to do it. But in the 2 years they had me doing that, they had the company circling the drain, and so I had to come back and turn it around one more time. And so we were able to restore them to profitability in very short order. And then another company asked me to do the same for them. So here I am.
Wow. Yeah. And I can't help but ask this. As I was reading through the story, this is the one thing that kept on coming to me. So I'm not going to suggest it. I'm just going to ask the question and kind of, you'll probably say what I think, but what attracted you to failing businesses? Was it just happenstance? Was it just what you said earlier? Was it a turn of fortune, or do you believe that that there was something else that kind of equipped you to look at a company that looked like it had no hope, and then to take that company and infuse hope into it?
Well, I think the first time was blind faith. I went in there knowing that I couldn't make it any worse, because I mean they were a soup sandwich, and so I had and it was better than what I was leaving. So there was big risk, but there was also big reward. So I kind of leapt off the cliff a little riskier than one would think would be healthy, but.
So you didn't know what you were doing.
I didn't know what I was doing, and I wasn't smart enough to know better. So that was the problem.
It's okay. There's a wise saying, nobody knows anything. And that's in reference to Hollywood. But yeah, I've realized the older I get, the more I realize, man, there's a lot of people who don't know exactly what they're doing, but we make it work.
Right. And so, but then once, I got one successful turnaround under my belt, I realized that, this wasn't that tough. And then, while I was doing that, I also rescued the local regional chamber of commerce. They got themselves in a jam in the 2007, 2008 crash, and they were circling the drain. And I inherited that organization with heavy debt, zero cash. And I think I even floated them a payroll for one payroll period to get them back on their feet. And we turned them around. And then I realized that, this isn't that tough. I mean, a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet, that's arithmetic there. There's no alphabet in a profit and loss statement or a balance sheet. It's all pretty easy, right? So once you learn how to control your costs and have the dedication to doing what you need to do, it's really not that difficult. It's just that most folks don't have the discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you go from very auspicious beginnings into very difficult and hard beginnings, and sometimes even dark. And then you work your way up, and you reach a level of success working for multi-million-dollar companies and turning companies around and helping them be successful once again. And this is where I guess I really wanted to go to just talk about this, is that your life takes even yet another turn. And already we've seen some redemption in your story. You go from looking like on the outside somebody that most people wouldn't want to ever meet in public, much less meet in a dark alley, like I said before, but certainly for all intents and purposes, to look at your life as it was back in those days before the doc. And you're dealing drugs, using drugs, biker gang, mafia, beating up people, doing all of that stuff. Most people would look at you and they would immediately discount you. They would immediately say, there's no hope for this guy. And that's why I asked about turning around businesses. I wondered if your story helped you kind of be attracted to lost causes, because for all intents and purposes, that's your life. But now we look at your life on the other end of that, and it's totally taken a change, but it even takes one step further change. But here's the important thing I think to note about that is, we're living in an age right now more and more, because we're going to get to the God part of your story. We're living in an age more and more where we're moving further and further away from the Christian foundations of America. So we presently live in a post-Christian nation now, where more and more people are considering themselves nons or unbeliever. And as we do so, it's interesting to me, I've said this a couple of times, and people can even disagree, but that's okay. They're entitled to be wrong. But we're living in an age of cancel culture, which essentially means this: there's no room for redemption. What you did when you were 16 and that thing that you posted on social media, we're going to hold it over your head right now, and we're going to get your head. I mean, we're even right now on the verge of the Chauvin trial, being over and the verdict being released, and everybody's on pins and needles because we just feel like, who knows what's going to happen next in Minneapolis based upon this verdict. And it feels like very, very much so that we're in this just broken world, and we're losing hope and optimism in the future. But back to cancel culture too, is it just seems to be based on this idea that there is no such thing as redemption anymore. Well, boy, wouldn't it be awesome if we could infuse a worldview that was foundationally built upon, yes, the brokenness of mankind, the fallen nature of man, but then a belief system that says, hey, but there's hope, there's redemption. That's not the final verdict. That doesn't have to be the period on the story of humanity. There is redemption for all people who turn to Christ and find faith in Christ. And so I think it's important to paint that picture with your story, is just to say, hey, listen, if we use our subjective experience to tell us what Marcel was supposed to be, we probably would have been right in most cases to say that person is never going to amount to anything. If we look on the outside and our past experience tells us, man, that person's never going to make it. But there's another reality outside of our subjective experience that turns into our objective reality. There's a transcendent reality. There's a God that's above all of our past experience, the way that we feel, and everything that's going on in our society. And that's really why I wanted to talk with you today, because I think you can shed light not only on your weaknesses and your difficulties, but also your successes, but also through the midst of all of them, realize that there's redemption for everybody. Just like I said with Daryl, there's redemption for the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, because your story actually takes a more interesting turn in that you were experiencing great success. And then that's when you realized you needed Jesus. So tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so I think this is a case of, you got to be careful what you ask for, right? Because I so desperately did not want to be one of those statistics, that you were referencing that says, this guy is not going to make it. He can't make it. Statistically says that, that he doesn't have a prayer and he doesn't have a chance. And so I really wanted to validate myself as something other than a second-class citizen, convict, so to speak, right? And gangsters and whatnot. I was working very hard to legitimize my existence, feeling that I was under this black cloud, or that I was under a rock and followed always by that cloud. And it just, I worked so hard, and I so wanted to be successful. That's all what mattered to me, right? And then, I sold this company, did very, very well in the sale, and here I am. I got everything I asked for. I got success. I got the recognition. My peers consider me a captain of business, a titan of industry. But the truth is that I was on my third failed marriage. I was drinking like a fish. And sure, I had a fat bank account, but man, I was about as miserable as you can get. I mean, I was about as miserable as I was when I was in solitary confinement. That's how miserable I was. And so I just said, man, this can't be it. This cannot be it. And interestingly enough, I was in one of the local watering holes down the street from where I lived. It was within staggering distance of my house. I didn't drive drunk. And I was down there with my next door neighbor who was a San Diego police officer, big old dude, biggest black guy you'll ever meet. I mean, big as a house, played football, coached football, just a prince of a man, just an absolutely exceptional man. We were down there in that local watering hole, and we were solving all the world's problems, just chatting it up and everything like that. And I was getting pretty well oiled, and I think I was just liquored up enough to where when he said, "Hey, why don't you go to church with me tomorrow?" I said yes, and I don't know why I said yes. I shouldn't have said yes, but I did say yes. And so the next morning rolls around, and I'm laying in bed, and there's two distinct poundings, right? There's one in my head and one somewhere else in the house, which I can't quite locate just yet. And then I realized it was Jay at my front door, and it all came back to me in this, hung over haze. And so I get up and I go to the front door, and man, he wasn't taking no for an answer. Let's go.
Man.
And so, you know what? We went to church. And Reed, I kid you not, it was as if that sermon was written for me. And I walked into that church hoping that it would not get hit by lightning just by me walking in the door. I just felt like I didn't belong there. I shouldn't be there. This, what was I thinking? Man, I must have got drunk last night to agree to this. I mean, all the, things like that. And then I go, and man, oh man, I don't think there was anything more important that I could have heard in my life at that time than the message I received that day. And I was hooked, it was just so appropriate, so on point. It was about simplifying your life, decluttering your life, making time for important things like Jesus, giving yourself some space, a little breath of fresh air, that type of thing. And so that really, it resonated with me, and it was just like, man, where have you been all my life? I needed to hear this. And so I started going on a regular basis, and there wasn't that aha moment every week that I went, but every week that I went, there was something that I took away that was positive. And then I started talking to one of the pastors there on a regular basis. I had a lot of questions. I'm like, God, he must have hated me, man. I was talking to him all the time and peppering him with stuff, and he was so patient. I mean, he was just a saint. And the more I developed my relationship with the Lord, the more I realized that everything I'd done in my life from start to up to this point, it didn't matter. It wasn't what's truly important. And if you realize what's important, all that stuff just goes down in the priority level, and you realize that this isn't really a big deal. Being a titan of business and industry, being a guy of independent, financially independent, all that stuff doesn't matter if you just follow the most fundamental, Christian principles. Man, your life is going to be richer than any bank account you can imagine. It's like winning a super lottery. And Scripture provides you with the tools to address anything that can happen, how to live within your means, how to deal with relationships. I mean, anything you can imagine, there is an answer there. And then for one time in my life, after I got baptized, I realized that, I am truly forgiven. And that was a turning point in my life, because at that point in time is when I started going out and helping other ex-offenders, find their way back into civilization, so to speak, help them re-enter the workforce and do those type of things. And I was able to confidently say that, number one, I did the time the society deemed appropriate for my indiscretions, and I don't owe anybody anything else. And number two, I'm forgiven. I know that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and I'm forgiven, and I don't require anybody else's endorsement. That's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Right? And so, that just takes all that burden off of you, and now you begin to live life in a fashion that makes a difference, that matters, and what matters, and all that stuff that I was doing, even when I was on the dark side, and got away from the dark side and wanted to be a professional and a career guy, even that focus was misplaced, right? It was misplaced on all the wrong stuff for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And no wonder I'm, at the time I was drinking like a fish and had 3 failed marriages, and everything was just a train wreck. I mean, my life was a train wreck. I mean, look outside looking in, wow, this guy's a very accomplished professional, but at Casa de Becker, it was a train wreck. It was a train wreck.
Yeah, no doubt. I think I love that story just because of the roller coaster ride that is your life, but that I could just kind of love the idea that you got to this pinnacle. You experienced this low place, but then you got to this pinnacle too, and you realized not only that you can help people in between, but you also realized that no matter if you're at the bottom or at the top, there's still something that our hearts desperately need, that our souls search for, that cannot be met with anything here on this earth. So you tried it with drugs, okay? Where most of us are willing to admit that we can't find it there. But then you tried it with fame, success, and money and power, and you didn't find it there either. Which I think is a great reminder, because now we find ourselves, whether we're anywhere on the spectrum there, trying to find meaning. I mean, I just had Christopher Yuan on the other day on the podcast, and we were talking about how we're trying to find meaning in our sexual identity and stuff, and we just find ourselves not being fulfilled in this world. I really think that that's kind of the meta narrative right now of our world, is people desperately searching for meaning. I think so much of what's happening with race in America is people searching for meaning. I think what's happening with gender ideology in America is people searching for meaning. Isn't that what we're all doing? And I think we need to be as bold as ever before, Christians nowadays, to speak the gospel truth, not just to speak on behalf of Black Lives Matter, or not just to speak on behalf of whatever cause that we can come up with, but to offer the hope that can truly only be found, not in nodding to the culture, not in helping people think how cool we are or how relevant we are to the culture, but in helping people remember that 2,000 years ago, there was an answer given to all of this. So the fact that we're trying to pretend today that that we're experiencing anything new under the sun is still a little bit boggling to the mind. And Christians need to be more outspoken than ever before. But I want to just share this story, and then I'll kind of get your thoughts too on it. But it reminds me of the story of Deion Sanders. Now, obviously, nowhere near as famous or as financially wealthy as him, but still certainly successful. And so the similar idea is that Deion Sanders had experienced the pinnacle of his career. He had just won the Super Bowl. He was the MVP in the Super Bowl. He got a Ferrari, I think, for being the MVP in the Super Bowl, has a Super Bowl ring. He goes back to his hotel room that night, and after partying all night and celebrating, he's filled with just this emptiness, because now he's achieved the ultimate, the penultimate in his career as a Super Bowl champ and an MVP. He's done everything essentially that he can do in his line of work. And he's so empty because he finds that it is not satisfying, that he kneels down on the side of his bed and he prays and he receives Christ. And now Deion Sanders is a very outspoken Christian. And so I think that's the journey that we find ourselves on today in America, is that we have to be able to speak to everybody on either end of the spectrum, whether they seem lost, like a lost cause, and the legalistic person would say that person has no hope, or they're a very wealthy person and we think, oh, that person's got it all together. The reality is no, none of us do. And I don't think that's the thing we're willing to admit in America anymore, is that like we don't have answers to this stuff, but we know somebody who does. So I almost wonder if humility needs to play a major role in our life. Once again, in order for us to realize that redemption is not far, but it can't be found in many of the things that we're trying to find it in today. And this is where so much of this like social angst and frustration is coming from.
Yeah, it's it is tragic, but save people serve, and I think that one of the things that makes my life complete today is the ability to help others that are experiencing a dark chapter in their
so
life.
Important.
Excuse me?
That's so important.
Yeah, whether it's addiction or coming out of incarceration and attempting re-entry after a long prison stay, which is a real uphill climb to be. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but rehabilitation was an experiment in the 70s that lasted about 2 years. And we don't rehabilitate people, we warehouse them. They just get warehoused. And then they get come out at the end of their sentence, and the world has changed. They don't even recognize the world that they live in today. I've got a good friend of mine, Brother King. I hired him out of the Second Chance program after being locked up for 27 calendar years. And here he comes out into a world with technology, cell phones. He's got car makes and models he's never seen before, and just helping him through everyday life. It's just like, it's you can't even wrap your head around it. And so we don't set these people up for success when they get out. That's why we have the statistics that we have for recidivism and stuff, because we do not rehabilitate them then when they're in, and we don't provide them a path when they're out. I'm working with several nonprofits that try to do that, but it's not, it's only as good as the level in which they're funded, and they're funded by private donors, including me. But it's just a tragedy what we do to these folks, and America is the land of second chances, and
Yeah.
we need to find opportunities for these folks to be able to come back and contribute. And I can tell you that the biggest determining factor as to whether or not somebody's going to reoffend or not is if they have a job and they can take care of themselves. That's the biggest factor. So to get these folks re-entered into the workforce is huge. It's a privilege to do that work. And even at this work, one of the things that, I believe is the reason that I'm, as accomplished as I am with company turnarounds is because I'm a practitioner of servant leadership. One of my favorite books is an autographed copy of Lead Like Jesus by Ken Blanchard. I've read the first one, the revisited one, and servant leadership. You make yourself accountable, and when other people are not performing at the desired expectations, you realize that that's not a shortcoming on their part; it's a shortcoming on your part. As a leader, you haven't provided them with the tools, the training, or the whatever they need to be successful in mentorship. And so, I like to lead a team in servant leadership. And man, I tell you, the enterprise takes on a whole new life. When I first started at this place, we put the fun in dysfunctional. I mean, everybody was in competition with one another, and not even talking to each other. And now that we're have a whole change in posture, the whole vibe is different. And we're 5 months into this, and we're going to have the first positive quarter that we've had in several years. So it's a testimonial to the servant leadership style, and how you can move mountains when you lead like Jesus.
I love that. Yeah, we need to reclaim that too. I hope this doesn't sound too uncharitable, but I think if Christian communities, if pastors especially, were less interested in their Instagram and Facebook stats or their TikTok stats, and were more interested in servant leadership, perhaps we wouldn't find ourselves pioneering these grievance causes in society today, but we would find ourselves coming alongside of the brother or the sister, especially people in minority communities who are really largely affected by prison population in terms of how many minorities are actually in prison. And we just focused on an issue like that. Think about what one church could do if it actually just said, we're going to focus on this, and we're going to make a dent in recidivism. And so we're going to come alongside brothers and sisters who get released from prison. We're going to help them find a job. We're going to help them truly seek rehabilitation instead of let them be on their own. I mean, I know there's a million different causes, but I just think we'd have, if we really took that to heart, and maybe we can't expect that from the culture, but we certainly can expect it from Christians. But even from a cultural perspective, if we took to heart issues and causes like that, I can't help but wonder if there'd be less burning buildings in the street and less rioting and looting in the streets if we took serving and serving others and the issues that are going on in the world from a fundamental level, instead of just the things that catch the news media's attention, but actually really fixing issues, doing the work, as they say, if our perspective wouldn't be totally different. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you for not just being a statistic in terms of how your story has turned around, but also helping other people become a statistic too, that you don't have to go back to that life, that you can find hope, that you can find a new life. And thank you for the testimony too that you shared in that book, because I think that's a huge help to those who are going to read that. Maybe even people who are listening to this podcast who would say, I'm looking at myself and I don't feel like I've got a second chance. Or maybe a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh chance. I think you would agree and amen that what Proverbs says, that a man falls down 7 times, but he gets back up. A righteous man gets back up. And that's the only difference between those who sink and swim, is that we're not willing to stay down.
Amen. Amen, brother. Yeah, Reed, I tell you, I think that, as Christians, we need to take a look at ourselves, and we need to recognize where we can make a difference, and then we need to go do it. It's a lot more than just going to church on Sundays and doing your daily devotionals and stuff like that. Save people, serve. And we need to find where we can contribute and how we can contribute, because when you talk about if ex-offenders, that's a population that has been largely abandoned by nearly everyone, right? Nearly everyone, those folks. And that's why the statistics are so awful. But in truth, with just a little bit of training as far as, life skills for the workplace, it's a class that I teach routinely at the Second Chance program here in San Diego. Just a little bit of reentry assistance and then the opportunity for a job. So the individual, who's just come out of gladiator school, right? They've been fighting for their lives every single day.
Yeah.
And they are not ready for what's happening. Just a little bit of a transition to help them reorientate, so to speak. And all they want to do is take care of themselves. They don't want to be a burden to anybody. They just want to, be functional. They've done their time. They've paid their debt. It's over, right? They don't owe anybody anything. But at the end of the day, I learned the hard way that doing this life alone, you may get what you want, but you're not going to get what you need. And you need that relationship. You gotta, you gotta have, faith, because what is empowering, that makes this life worth living.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want people to go out and get your story, because I think they'll truly be inspired. People need to turn off the news a little bit here and there, and not only go to church, but also get some good stories, some stories that end on a high note, and just soak those in, because there's enough negative going on in the world that we need to start taking in some positive stories, and then really taking that positivity out to the street. So tell me, because I only spoke with Wesley a little bit about this. So where are people going to be able to find the book if they want to get the book?
Have it on Amazon, and you're going to be able to get the book in either a paperback, or you can get a digital version if you're a Kindle or iPhone fan. And I'm talking where I don't have a lot of education, but apparently there's a lot of different technologies available for electronic media. So it'll be available in all those formats. And I tell you, Reed, that's one of the reasons that I wrote this book, is because people need to hear that one or two missteps in life, or maybe a couple dozen, like in my case, it doesn't mean the end. All right, there is always redemption, and with faith there's triumph.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's always hope. Yeah. So I want everybody that's listening to go check out Free at Last by Marcel Becker and W.A. Fulkerson, and get that book, because it's a roller coaster ride. It's an exciting read. It's actually a really, really easy read. It's only like 170 pages or something like that. So it's definitely something that you can read, get a lot out of, and finish very quickly, and very fulfilling. So I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you, more importantly, for the story and the work that you're doing, and not only turning around businesses, but helping people turn around their lives.
Thank you. It was a privilege to be with you.
All right. God bless you, man. Thank you so much, and look forward to hopefully talking with you again in the future and seeing great success. Bye-bye, everybody. Our thanks again to our guests for being on the show today. Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman was brought to you by our sponsors. If you like what you heard today, please do us a big favor and give it a 5-star review and like it and share it with friends. And if you want to hear more awesome guests, make sure to check out past episodes. Indie Thinker is a nonprofit paid for by our sponsors and the generous gifts of people like you. In order to hear more great guests like you did today, please consider giving a tax-deductible gift by going to indiethinker.org. And just remember, your voice matters, but infinitely more when you think for yourself.